TheTimesTribune.com. Scranton Man was glider infantry man engaged in Operations Market Garden and Battle of the Bulge. The first time Walter Carlson tried to enlist in the armed forces in 1942, it didn't work out so well. He arrived at his local Navy recruitment center. The lines out the door, the young man, like him, excited by the prospect of serving the United States in World War II. It was too damn crowded, he recalled. I said, the heck with it. I'll wait till I'm drafted. The Army inevitably came calling a year later, setting Mr. Carlson off on what would be an adventure of his life as a glider infantryman in Central Europe with the fabled 82nd Airborne Division. Mr. Carlson fought in two of the war's most notorious campaign operations, Market Garden and the Battle of the Bulge, earning the Bronze Star and narrowly managing to escape serious injury aside from shrapnel fragment that remains in his right forearm to this day. I was scared as hell, he said, the 90-year-old Scranton resident, as he recounted his experience on a recent afternoon. He had a love of flying. Mr. Carlson grew up in Garwood, New Jersey, the younger of 4 children of Swedish immigrant parents. When the war began, he was working as a switchboard wireman at a Westinghouse plant. His older brother joined the Army, Air Force, with intentions of becoming a pilot, so Mr. Carlson decided he would do the same with the Navy. His love of aviation stretched back to childhood, when he went up in a plane with Clarence Chamberlain, the second man to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. But following the botched trip to the Navy recruiting center, he went back to Westinghouse and waited for his draft notice. After getting it in the spring of 1943, he reported to Fort Dix. From there he was sent to Camp Shelby in Mississippi, where he and other Green recruits became the first members of the 60th Infantry Division. There the recruits were engaged in maneuvers with Japanese-American troops, playing the part of the enemy. During these late fake battles, Mr. Carlson was often killed. When I decided that I better stop fooling around, because up until then it was like a bunch of kids fooling around in the woods, he said. I said, well, if this is what I'm going to be like, I better get serious about it. Mr. Carlson was part of the third wave of guys to be taken out of the division and sent to Europe. He arrived in England aboard the SS Pasteur around the time of the Allied invasion of Normandy in June 1944. Just after arriving there, a call went out for a radio operator. He volunteered for the duty, but after a few days of training, grew incredibly bored with it. Then came an opportunity to join the 82nd Airborne 401st Glider Infantry Regiment, F Company. The post appeared to his fascination with an air travel. However, after seeing then came another opportunity to join the 82nd Airborne. I've already read that. However, after seeing some paratroopers return from Normandy, all battered and bruised, he thought to himself, I think I made a big mistake. The precursors to helicopters, the engineless gliders served several purposes, like ferrying infantry troops to the ground in a hot zone, The ones used at Normandy encountered a number of problems. Mr. Carlson and his fellow infantrymen went through rigorous training. They knew what the troubles were, and tried to correct them. He said, "We got pretty good training there." Mr. Carlson's company was sent to fly into Europe on several occasions, but the Army's rapid march through France kept delaying things. Finally, they got go-ahead at September up for Market Gardens, an operation which called on the Allies to take out a series of bridges in Holland and make their way into Germany via the Rhine River. The paratroopers went first, then came the gliders. After having a wall, a few days became inclement weather. As the gliders made their way to their drop-off points, the gravity of the situation finally overtook Mr. Carlson. "I looked out the window and saw all this black stuff out there." Mr. Carlson says it was anti-aircraft fire. His gliders slid through the artillery fire and safely landed in a large field. Within minutes, the field was filled with gliders, making it hard to move around. Mr. Carlson can still remember a pony in the field, frightened out of its wits by the action. His eyes were bulging. He was running back and forth. He didn't know what to do. Carlson said, one of the first things the troops had to do was ditch their gas masks. Mr. Carlson had his filled with D bars, military-issue chocolate, and bars that he took a liking to. He quickly stuffed the bars in his pockets as the soldiers moved down. The soldiers marched throughout the night. They came up relieved the paratroopers. Over the first couple of days, they engaged in tight skirmishes while taking position in the success of fields. Besides his carbine rifle, Mr. Carlson was assigned to a light machine gun. Carlson fell asleep one night with a cow nearby. The next morning he awoke to find the cow lying just a couple of steps from him, riddled with machine gun bullets. The trigger-happy soldier with whom he was guarding the position had killed the animal after confusing it for an approaching German. "Another step and the cow would have stepped on me," Mr. Carlson said. The heavy action started when the troops entered the Kelberg woods. The artillery fire was terrifying. Everything exploded all around Mr. Carlson that first day. Carlson was in a group split into two sections, with one taking the right flank and Carlson's group taking the left. A shell came down on the right side and killed everyone. The left side was the right side to me, Mr. Carlson said. The fighting got so intense that morning that an American officer and his German counterpart agreed to a temporary ceasefire. It was a surreal scene. Carlson said 1 minute the woods was raining fire, the next troops stood around doing nothing. The fighting eventually continued that afternoon, and Carlson witnessed unspeakable carnage. Several officers killed, a guy cut in half, a captain whose helmet was hit by shrapnel, curling his helmet back like a sardine can. Despite what he had seen, Carlson managed to fall asleep in his trench that night. His slumber ended, though when a mortar hit a nearby tree, a huge branch fell over the trench, and a piece of shrapnel pierced his back of Carlson's helmet and slid down his back. He wasn't injured, but it was hot for a couple of seconds, he said. A couple of days later, he noticed a shrapnel fragment in his forearm. The ferry continued when the troops left the woods during the firefight. A bullet hit the edge of Carlson's helmet, then left a small burn as it slid down his face. I went to my buddy and said, "I think something hit me, but I don't know what," Carlson said. Matt said he was far luckier than the other guy near him, including a lieutenant who got shot in the face and a fellow machine gunner who was hit 4 times. It got so bad Carlson had to play medic, but even trying to stanch the blood flow of a buddy shot in the belly. On another night while on patrol, he and some other soldiers barely crawled out of the view of German machine gun unit position up a hill from them. We all made it out, but I tell you, there was a lot of underwear that was dirty that night, he said. Despite heavy casualties Carlson's company had met their objective, but the Allies failed to meet their goal, with market gardens ensuring the war would continue into the winter months. As Christmas approached and the weather turned increasingly frigid, Carlson battered company down to just 102 men, regrouped and rested in France. After they cut down the Christmas tree, they heard about a breakthrough in the forest that marked his beginning of the Battle of the Bulge. The German full-scale offensives in the forest in hopes of turning the tide of the war back in their favor. Carlson's company was part of the 35th Glider Infantry Regiment, returned to the front near the town of Rigou, especially outside a house that was only one round for miles. Inside the home were a woman, her teenage daughter, and their maid. It was cold. He asked if he could come in the house. Carlson said, "We went into the back room and had all these animal heads from Africa." The girl, whose name was Georgette, spoke fluent English. She was very kind to the troops, delivering huge pans of ham and eggs to them on the day before Christmas. She also helped Carlson and his buddy clean their machine gun with oil. The next morning, Carlson woke to eerie silence. The reason a huge German tank was positioned out in the backyard. Quickly, Carlson fled to a foxhole. The tank pulverized the position, forcing the troops to retreat into the woods. After the war, Carlson wrote to Georgette. She told him the house was hit 38 times during the attack. 50 years later, during a reunion with his company, Mr. Carl saw the house again when the bus tour he was on passed it. Back in the Ardennes, the soldiers withstood furious assaults by the Germans while enduring a horrible cold. One Carlson's buddies ended up losing a couple of toes to exposure. Around January 3rd, the company started pushing the Germans back. By then, they had ditched their overcoats for increased mobility. When they got to the Siegfried Line, they were regularly overrunning German positions, but there were still plenty of harrowing moments, like the day Carlson was resting in a pillbox and a huge explosion occurred in his area. Carlson was fine, but the Nubian in the other hole was not. He got his head blown off. It was just a little bit of skin holding it there. I was looking down his throat and windpipe, said Carlson. Noting he got to the point where he made a little effort to get to know the new guy out of fear that end up like the guy in the pillbox. From the Siegfried Line, Carlson was sent to Paris for a brief respite. In the time he returned to the field, the company was rapidly advancing through German Germany, crossing over the Rhine and Elbe River. He knew that the end was near when 150,000 German troops surrendered to them in the town of Ludwighus. There Carlson was encountered the Russians and saw the remains of the concentration camps. The war ended. Carlson was sent to bombed out Berlin. He was there the rest of the year, and after Memorial New Year's Eve in London, he returned to the United States on the Queen Mary. He arrived in New York City just in time to take part in the Victory Parade. Life was good again. And that's the story. And Carlson, at the time of this, was aged 90. I think he's 94 now. And Ellen, who was our neighbor here, whose daughter and my daughter Brenda are still friends. Brenda goes to the West Coast on occasion, and she comes here. Ellen said that her father is a tough cookie, and he don't want hardly any help. The only help he wants is with finding his remote. And he never spoke. She never knew even of anything about this type of thing, and I practically begged to get this article, and she couldn't find it. But Google found it for me, and I'm doing my best to try to preserve it for history.
The words he carved became his epitaph.
Picture a young Walter Carlson around 1943. Military experience, a guided infantryman with the 82nd Airborne Division during World War II. Mr. Carlson fought in Operation Market Gardens and the Battle of the Bulge. He received the Bronze Star Medal for Valor, Distinguished Service Medal, and World War II Victory Medal, among other commendations. Residence in New Jersey. Family, wife, the late Caroline Carlson, 3 children, 4 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren. And I can't forget my friend Amy.